Okay, well, now it's time to talk a little bit about the autobiographical sketch itself, the text that I had assigned for you to read. Um, and the first thing you'll note is, well, a couple different things. Wasn't the happiest childhood, was it? I mean, she ended up being a really, really well-educated person, but she went through an awful lot to do it. You can see that this was a very brutal academic regime. I don't think there's any other word for it than brutal academic regime for a kid. Over on page 106, she talks about overwork. No kidding. He made one great mistake, she said. He thought to gain time by bringing forward the intellect as early as possible. So he's got her doing all these things. He's really trying to create this sort of child prodigy, child genius. And later on, she'll say, okay, but why did you educate me for all this when when I'm preparing to enter a world where I can't use any of this because I'm a woman. No one will let me use all of this because I'm a woman. I mean, it's kind of in a way, there's a certain cruelty to that, to prepare somebody so thoroughly for, an intellectual life and then knowing ahead of time that, that person's not going to be able to participate anyway. But, she's quite critical of this. And you see that it made huge changes to her personality that she goes on about. But she says his mistake was he thought to gain time by bringing forward the intellect as early as possible, basically pushing her at too young an age to engage in intellectual activities that really were not appropriate for small children. Thus, I had tasks given me, as many and various as the hours would allow, and on subjects beyond my age, with the additional disadvantage of reciting to him in the evening after he returned from his office, as he was subject to many interruptions. I was often kept up till very late, and as he was a severe teacher both from his habits of mind and his ambition for me, my feelings were kept on the stretch till the recitations were over. I mean, he kept his kid up late. Okay, it's time to recite everything you learned all day. Oh, wait a minute, let me get this phone call or whatever, right? I mean, no, they didn't have a phone, but you get the idea. Oh, wait, hold on. I've got to go. I've got to go write a letter real quick. I'll be back. The kid's up till midnight. The consequence was a premature development of the brain that made me a youthful prodigy by day, and by night a victim of spectral illusions, nightmare, and somnambulism. I mean, she couldn't sleep at night. Why? Well, because she had terrible nightmares. The poor kid, psychologically, this was a very traumatizing thing. I mean, imagine in the 19th century, fathers were considered unbelievable authority figures. You did not disappoint your father, especially of a certain class of person. And her father was, I mean, just one notch under God, and to disappoint your father, to go against his will was just something you did not want to do. And so she is under tremendous pressure as a little kiddo to perform and to do well. And he was a very exacting sort of teacher. This had a very traumatic effect on her, as you can see. I mean, she sleepwalked. She had horrible nightmares. She had insomnia. Insomnia, and this boy. She would be a real case for someone who was ready to psychoanalyze her. They would really find her a very complex case, and so she's really. No one knew why this child, already kept up so late, was still unwilling to retire. Well, she didn't want to go to bed even though she was kept up late because she was scared of having nightmares. So soon as the light was taken away, she seemed to see colossal faces advancing slowly towards her, the eyes dilated and each feature swelling loathsomely as they came, till at last, when they were about to close upon her, she started up and shrieked, which drove them away, but only to return when she lay down again. It was just, that's terrible, right? This is compounded, of course, by one of her earliest memories, and that is that her sister died. And, of course, infant mortality was a tremendous sad but common problem in the 19th century and even earlier. And so this specter of death around her, the temporariness of life and everything, was a really big sort of thing. So it had a tremendous impact on her. Later on, she says that she didn't make friends very easily because she was so different from the other kids because of this intense academic regimen, and that she didn't really relate to the other kids. It had an effect on her personality, and the other girls weren't mean to her or didn't dislike her. They just didn't relate to her very well. And this changes her views on education, which I'll speak about in a moment. Over on page 117, she makes a really good point. This is the thing you got to understand. And today we have all these different theories of education, and some of you guys may be education majors. I don't know. Maybe you're learning some of this. We got everything from Piaget to Montessori sort of approaches and different kinds of approaches to teaching, and different learning theories and learning styles and all that kind of stuff. The 19th century, all of that was completely unknown. I mean, the way you went to school is you went to school and you were given material and you just memorized it, and then you puked it back up on a test, and that was it. That was it. Gosh, it sounds like some of the standardized testing in public schools today. Anyway, but I mean, they really reduced learning to memorization. There was no creativity in it. There was no personal response. There was no personal development. None of that kind of thing. There was no development of empathy or social skills at all involved in learning. It was just do this, memorize this, and spit it back up. And if you had a great memorization ability, you did well in school. If you didn't have great memorization but you were a creative thinker, well, then you were just out of luck, and frequently you got the heck beat out of you. And so one of the things that she says on 117, she says, certainly I do not wish that instead of these masters I had read baby books. I mean, she's reading Shakespeare, she's reading all of these Homer, all these wonderful works at a very young age. She says, I didn't want to read baby books. I wouldn't suggest that, written down to children with such ignorant dullness that they blunt the senses and corrupt the tastes of the still plastic human being. Plastic meaning not plastic, but meaning flexible. That's where the word plastic, as in modern plastics, comes from, the flexibility of it. But I do wish that I had read no books at all till later, that I had lived with toys and played in the open air. Children should not cull the fruits of reflection and observation early, but expand in the sun and let thoughts come to them. They should not, through books, antedate their actual experiences, but should take them gradually, as sympathy and interpretation are needed. With me, much of life was devoured in the bud. That's such a sad line. In other words, what she's saying is, look, I wouldn't have little bitty children read at all for a while. Just let them have time to play and explore and to take in a little bit of life, to begin to appreciate the beauty and the glory of the natural world, to develop their social skills. And there's plenty of time for them to read Shakespeare later. And what's more is, honestly, if you cram it down their throats, they're going to see it as just a bunch of, stuff that they have to do rather than something they really want to do. And as a child, you can't fully appreciate Shakespeare. You can't. What child is going to understand or appreciate Romeo and Juliet? What child is going to understand or appreciate what Hamlet has to say about the temporality of this existence and the possible meaninglessness of life, the futility of life, and these are deep psychological concepts no 7-year-old is going to get anyway. What's the point? So what she's saying is, and then this last line, much of life was devoured in the bud. In other words, just as I was budding, like a rosebud or a flower bud or a tree bud, a lot of my life was just eaten up before I even got to be a grown up, right? I mean, a lot of my life was ruined before I even grew up. And it was because I had this overly achievement-oriented dad who was just cramming this down my throat. She even says something, but it changes her views on friendship as well, which I think is really interesting. Look over on page 120 of your text. And she talks about the different types of friendships and acquaintances. And this is really deep. This is really, really interesting and profound. She says, we meet, at least those who are true to their instincts meet, a succession of persons through our lives, all of whom have some peculiar errand to us. There is an outer circle, whose existence we perceive, but with whom we stand in no real relation, right? These are people that you don't really have a lot of connection to. They're just people you know. They tell us the news, they act on us in the offices of society, they show us kindness and aversion, but their influence does not penetrate. We are nothing to them, nor they to us, except as a part of the world's furniture, right? And you may be able to relate, right? There's people that you know and you work with, or you know, whatever, but you're not really close to them. I mean, you just kind of pass the time of day with them. These are not people that you let into the innermost parts of your life. Another circle within this are dear and near to us. We know them and of what kind they are. They are to us not mere facts, but intelligible thoughts of the divine mind. We like to see how they are unfolded. We like to meet them and part from them. We like their actions upon us and pause that succeeds and enables us to appreciate its quality. Often we leave them on our path and return no more, but we bear them in our memory, tales which have been told and whose meaning has been felt. These are the people that are in that inner ring that we're very close to and that we really have a deep connection to, a spiritual and psychological connection, an emotional connection. And then she says, but a yet nearer group there are, beings born under the same star, and bound with us in a common destiny. These are not mere acquaintances, mere friends, but when we meet, are sharers of our very existence. There is no separation. The same thought is given at the same moment to both. Indeed, it is born of the meeting, and would not otherwise have been called into existence at all. These not only know themselves more, but are more for having met, and regions of their beings which would else have laid sealed in cold obstruction burst into leaf and bloom and song. In other words, there are people who are so close to you, they are actually part of who you are. These are not just people you're very fond of. They're certainly not mere acquaintances. These are people who, if it weren't for them, you wouldn't be you. Okay? And that's a level of psychological and emotional and spiritual intimacy that is really, really, really deep. And she says we all form these kinds of friendships. We all form these kinds of relationships. For me, she says, it was really tough to form those latter two because I never had a chance to really make deep connections with people, much less the deepest of all connections until much, much later. She was stunted. But she did meet someone who had that kind of profound effect on her. And as a result, this was a model to her. And this young woman really, really made an impact on her and changed her life. And she said, I've never actually been close to someone like that before, you know, on a mental and emotional and spiritual level. When this friend was withdrawn, I fell into a profound depression. She had finally, as a girl, made this really great close connection with somebody that she really felt, this person understands me, this person is you know, meaningful in my life. But then that was taken away from her. She left, and that's a really left a big void in her, and it was never replaced. So this is a very intimate and a very personal piece that she's giving us, and we kind of see the problems faced by a woman of that period who had tremendous mental ability and a great education. I'm not saying great in the sense of it was terrific. I'm saying great in the sense of that it was unbelievably rigorous and thorough, and she accomplished a great deal intellectually. But the problem is she runs smack into the wall of, now that I have all this education, I'm not allowed to do anything with it. I'm not allowed to do anything. What am I going to do with my life? What do I do with that? Now, some of her upbringing had a very profound effect on her career. Obviously, she was a writer and a thinker and a lecturer and did all these kinds of things, and was intimately involved in the literary circles and literary in the publishing circle. She was an editor of a journal for a magazine for a number of years, or for a couple of years, I should say. But one of the things that she did was she went to work for Bronson Alcott. His name will come up a little bit later on. Louisa May Alcott's father. Louisa May Alcott wrote Little Women. We're going to read that later on in the semester. But Bronson ran this school called the Temple School in Boston, and it was held at a Masonic temple. That's where they held the school. And Fuller went there along with others and worked for Alcott. And Alcott was this crazy guy. Remember, he's the guy that they took up a collection for because he couldn't really make a good living. He tried opening a school, and he had these crazy ideas for education. And they were crazy for the age. So, for example, he decorated the classroom with interesting, bright, and elaborate sort of decorations. He put sort of sculptures and paintings of admirable people up all over the room as examples for the students. He let them bring in natural things like tree leaves and flowers and things. And they did artwork and put it up on the walls. This was radical. Today, you walk into any elementary school, and that's exactly what they all look like. But at the time, this was thought, he's crazy. He's lost his mind. Why? The students will all be distracted. They should have their heads down, facing their desk, and they should be memorizing and just writing stuff. And anything like that in the room is just going to cause distractions, and it's going to be just a real diversion, and you mustn't do this. He would open up the windows and let in fresh air. He didn't believe in spanking. He never spanked. He wouldn't do it. And people thought, you are out of your mind. You're going to raise just serial killers or something. I don't know what they thought. He also had a really interactive and participatory classroom, which was very, very unusual. No one asked students what they thought. The student was supposed to sit there, shut up, be quiet, and memorize the crap I give you, and then puke it back up, like I said. But one of the things that got him in trouble was he had roundtable discussions with elementary schools on the Gospels. So they would read Matthew or Luke or Mark, and he would read a passage, and then he would ask the students what they thought it meant. What did you think of it? What did it make you think about? How did you feel reading this? What else do you think about it? Because Alcott was convinced, like most romantics, that children, being fairly new in this world, were fairly freshly come from heaven. And they were actually closer to God than we were. We've been here, we've gotten tough and hardened and more removed from God, but children are like fresh out of heaven. They just came down here. And so whatever they say about religion or the Gospels or Bible or God or whatever is probably closer to reality than what adults will teach you about it, right? Okay, now that's the radical kind of a little bit on the kooky side stuff, right? Gives children an awful lot of authority on theological matters that I'm not sure most of us would accept these days. But the idea was he wanted to read the passage, have a discussion, and have people set it down. In writing, what did the children say? And he wanted to learn from it and say, well, I wonder what insights children have into this. No one at the time thought children would have any insights at all, much less be anything interesting. Children just babble about things. They don't know anything about it. They have to be taught all this stuff. And Alcott said, well, maybe they can teach us, which is really, really revolutionary and radical. She was affiliated with that school for a while because she really believed in educational experimentation. She really believed in it. And Alcott taught both boys and girls in the same classroom. The undoing of it was twofold. People got a look at the written material that was the transcriptions of the students' conversations on the gospel and said, oh my gosh, you're letting these students read the gospel and talk about it and without any instruction, and so they're just coming up with these wild things like maybe Jesus came on a spaceship or something. And you and I would probably say, okay, that's kind of harmless, but back in the day they would have thought, oh my gosh, what is he doing? He's undermining all of their religious education and instruction by letting them just make up their own beliefs. The second thing, though, that was a really big thing, when that came out, it came to light that he was also educating students of different races in the school. And some of the parents took their kids out of the school because they did not want to be associated with an integrated school. They were fine and knew it was integrated, but they didn't want other people to know that their child was in an integrated school, which is really sad. He had a couple of African American kids in the school, and the parents of the white children who were in the school knew that, but when everybody else knew that, some of them pulled their kids out, and then it was no longer viable. So Fuller's a really interesting person. Everyone studies her to see what she had to say about women's rights and about, you know, women's place in the 19th century, and everybody talks about that. What they don't talk about is how much she had to say about education and how she was a real pioneer to try to change some of that, and much of it for the better. Yeah, anytime you experiment with new things, some of it's going to be kind of kooky, that's true, but even though 10% is kooky, 90% of it may end up being really great. Some of the reasons we teach today effectively is because we don't do what they used to do, which was kind of barbaric and dark ages when it comes to educational practice and theory back then. And she's one of the reasons why we do things the way we do today. Okay, so you're going to have information about your quiz and the discussion post in the announcement on Blackboard. I'm not including it in the video this time, okay? So be looking for that. Thanks.